Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? It's Sunday morning here in the Upper Midwest. Today we're going to review some fun jazz records. Hope everybody's been doing well and surviving this political maelstrom. It's been a very convoluted time, a lot of discord and a lot of misinformation. The global trade alliances are being rewritten, and most of it's happening without anybody around me even kind of comprehending BRICS versus the American colonialism and control of the world's resources that are kind of really at play here. It's all led to kind of a backlash against jazz and culture in general in America. There's a real sense of isolation and fear that's kind of fueling a backlash against the arts, against the art community, against the liberal mindsets of the trans and gay, queer communities, and anything that feels progressive, anything that feels speaking up for the little man. There feels like a real current that speaks up against it. And that being said, the cafe has been as slow as it's been, and the polarization feels really strong. And I still get some great people in here, obviously, often from the Twin Cities or Rochester, and there's still some great conversations to be had about this music. But the openness to art, to open-minded thought, has become very displaced. There's a real sense of mistrust of intellectualism and of empathy. And empathy is a product of understanding. Let's never forget that. And the opposite of empathy and understanding is ignorance and fear and hate. And I just feel a real backlash in America right now against the arts and against, even colleges and university people, but jazz is in that crosshairs, and it just feels like the openness that people might have had a few years ago is even more diminished now, especially on the right side of the political aisle, because this is freedom music, this is resistance music, this is a people expressing their voice against tyranny and surviving irregardless of the odds. We were going to overcome. We were going to be victorious. And that message has become offensive to some people. But let's not diminish the message in any way to make it more palatable. This is the resistance to tyranny, the resistance to segregation and oppression. And let's remember that civil rights happened oh so short a time ago, and a lot of this music happens against the backdrop of the pre-civil rights era. And the political and social discord that exists in this country. You can't listen to jazz and not hear that undercurrent. I don't know how people think that it's just some art form about numbers and virtuosity and miss the power of what the swing era was, and what bebop was, and what hard bop was. There's so much resistance and so much dancing in spite of our sorrows, how we're going to survive in this music. And it's just as relevant to say today as it's ever been. And there's an old saying that the winners of the great wars write the history books. Well, the balance to that is the losers of wars get to make great art. Whereas My Shepherd I Shall Not Want wasn't written by the Romans or the Egyptians, it was written by those slave Israelites. It's a man that's not free that can tell you what freedom is. It's a people lost in the wilderness that can dream of a promised land. And so jazz exists in the backdrop of pre-civil rights America. And even though there feels like a backlash against the arts and against intellectualism, it doesn't mean that this art has been diminished in any way in its importance or the message that it has to say. And in some ways, it's more important than it's ever been to say these things. This music is about freedom. It's not about intellectualism. It's not about composition and ego and virtuosity. It's the expression of a person's soul resisting the occupation of a ruling class. It's the coloring outside the lines, expressing a man's blues. And the blues is everything that's not written on the page. So every time you express something from your own condition, that's what the blues is. And jazz is that in every sense, especially before the compositional era of the free jazz and the avant-garde, which became much more compositionally driven, much more intellectually driven. And let's be clear, there's also a great deal of power in that music as well. I mean, if you listen to Coltrane and Ornette and some of that stuff from the 60s, it's against the backdrop of the culmination of the civil rights movement. And obviously Coltrane was one of the greatest ambassadors, not just for Black America, but for the entire human race. Coltrane spoke for everybody, and his horn was an intercessor on behalf of all humanity towards the cosmos, towards the Creator, praying for an inner peace, praying for an understanding of purpose and meaning in this life. I mean, so Coltrane really elevates himself into this interesting spiritual giant that really spoke loudly through his art form. But a lot of people look at the earlier stuff and think it doesn't have the same context, when actually it's laced with the same underpinning, same rejoicing that I'm still here. You haven't extinguished my flame yet, and while I'm here, my fingers are going to express. My mouth, my emotions are going to express. And there's a joy and a love of life that I find to be overpowering in this music and stimulating and exciting. And so we're going to jump into some records here that are kind of random, but it's stuff I've been playing at my DJ gigs and letting people kind of hear in the coffee shop as well, of course. And it's a pretty wide range of stuff. Right now we're listening to Hampton, one of the great West Coast piano players, well-versed in bebop. Wasn't really a hard bop player, but he certainly was a powerful voice. This is, of course, on the contemporary label, number 3523. I don't think this was from 10 inches. I think this might have been just one session recorded in probably 55. And that crossover era from the 10 inch to the LP, recorded at the Contemporary Studios in 1956, Roy Dunan. Yeah, so it's, I think it is one session with Red Mitchell and Chuck Thompson on the drums. But, I mean, he's a great player, a really nimble, dexterous guy who at times reminds me of Eddie Costa a little bit with some of his rolling midsections. But Hawes is kind of on the periphery of the modern jazz collector's landscape for some reason. But his work at Contemporary is fabulous, and there's quite a bit of material there. And he shows up at other places as well. He has an early 10-inch on I can't think of the name of the label right now. But I mean, he's a pretty prolific guy. And he plays with most of the great cats on the West Coast most of his career. Next we're going to talk Billie Holiday a little bit. And I did a large episode on her probably 6 months ago. Really dove into her career and got to understand the chronology of her recordings, understand where her different labels and eras kind of fits in. And this is her Decca material, which comes in the 40s. And it's just a collection of her Decca 78s. And they collected most of her stuff on various LPs. And then this is a collection culled from those LPs of the greatest hits. And again, these were hits that would have charted back in the 40s on Decca. And Loverman was actually a pretty big success for her. God Bless the Child as well was also a fairly big. Crazy He Calls Me is fabulous. Ellington's Solitude. But I mean, when you listen to this Billie, it's very clear how the setting is corporate America, Decca Records. This is not some small label jazz ensemble backing her. These are large studio recordings. And the nature and the person that Billie is still allows her to pour the blues and the jazz out of her veins and pores. I mean, it just oozes out of her. But this is not classic jazz in that sense. And it's funny how that line is so hard to distinguish at times, because it's a very fuzzy line for people, the line between what's pop and what's jazz. And only the greatest singers, the Armstrongs, the Holidays, could always inflect some inspiration and some personal expression on any setting. And Holiday could always do that. And she was, I mean, such a troubled soul, from her drug addictions to the poverty to the, I mean, just the violence and the abuse and being raised in just the brothels and the vice houses. And I mean, she saw a lot of real sad things in her life. And robbed by friends and family. I mean, just constantly on the brink of survival. And yet her art always reflected an optimism and a hope and a resiliency that kind of elevates her above any session that she's recording in. And I've listened to this Decca Greatest Hits quite a bit the last few weeks. It's just good background music. And like I said, it's hard to really label this as a straight jazz recording, even though it's one of the greatest jazz singers ever. It's certainly pop with a jazz singer behind the wheel. But, I mean, there's no swing there. There's no the essence of how the jazz bubbles and moves and percolates. There's very little improvisation happening. There's probably some degrees of it. But all the same, these are great recordings. And to link this to Adele, I mean, Adele's not doing jazz in the improvisational sense. She's singing pop with a jazz blues essence. And so these recordings will actually take you very close to a lot of what the modern quote-unquote jazz singers are kind of doing. Obviously, Adele's not strictly a jazz singer in that vernacular, but these recordings will seem somewhat familiar because they are a pop landscape. But let's not diminish them and say they're not important, because they absolutely are. They're fantastic. That's nice right there. Love her Decca stuff. So now we're looking at the great Betty Roche. And this is Take the A Train on Bethlehem, number B64. Great cover. And Betty Roche is I won't say a tragic figure, but kind of a sad figure, because she appears with Ellington's orchestra. I think 42 to 44 is when she's with Duke. And it's at that point where Strayhorn and Duke composed Take the A Train. And she was the initial singer of that song in the live experience when you saw the Ellington Orchestra. Roche does a wonderful take on the song. But there was a recording band during the war. And so the sad part of it was she never got to really record A Train with Ellington. And I don't know if Duke was behind this, but in 56 probably, Gus Wilde actually has a couple Ellington sessions that he records. They're in the BCP series. And they're good Ellington sessions. And Ellington's also kind of part of that large Porgy and Bess Bethlehem triple album, I think it was, maybe a quadruple record even. It's a big production with a lot of people on it. But Ellington was a showpiece on some of what Bethlehem was doing at that point. And maybe it was Duke who brought Roach to Wilde and Creed Taylor's attention and said, she was fabulous, give her a shot. And so, however she got there, I'm not certain. She does get the opportunity to sing and record A-Train for the Bethlehem label. And Eddie Costa's on the piano, on the vibes here. Conti Gondoli on the trumpet. Don Tanner on the piano. Whitey Mitchell on the bass. Davey Williams on the drums. Recorded in '56 in April in New York City. And she does some fun kind of standards of the time, like the Route 66. You Don't Love Me No More. September in the Rain. Of course, this is the A-Train with Costa on the vibes. So she's not playing with any Ellington alumni on this, really, but all the same, it's great to get to hear her sing A-Train. And a lot of gospel in her voice. A lot of the black church is just oozing out of her. And again, just a great cover. I think it's Bert Goldblatt, yeah. Beautiful Bethlehem. And it's just such a cool time in jazz and graphic design, and it's a record that's tough to come by, but if you see it, you should definitely grab it. It probably won't be $100. It'll probably be $40 to $60, because her name is fairly obscure today, sadly. But Betty was a fantastic talent, and I think she has one other record on one of the labels, if I remember. My memory's slipping today. It doesn't seem to have the connections that it normally would. But great stuff. I mean, love the record. I played it like 3 times back to back the other day. And I don't play vocal records back to back as much as I will instrumental record. I find instrumental records I can play them over and over and over again and always kind of hear something different every time. Whereas with vocal stuff, you're always kind of, you feel like you already heard it, more so. But again, I really enjoy her versions of these songs. And great backing band. And Bethlehem's doing some great stuff in this 55, 56, even 53, 54. Bethlehem is one of the most important labels in jazz in that mid-50s era. And it was a small window for them. By, 57, 58, their role and their importance is greatly diminished. And of course, Bethlehem was eventually bought out by the King record label. And a lot of what comes out on Bethlehem towards the end of the 6000 series wasn't even recorded by Bethlehem. The stuff that King had in the vaults, or King was repackaging from other recordings. And King was buying up a lot of smaller labels at that time and kind of reissuing the stuff. And they used the Bethlehem imprint because it had a good jazz legacy at that time. And again, Bethlehem's really kind of slipped into obscurity. I've had a lot of people tell me that without me, they probably would have even never heard of Bethlehem. And of course, it's guys like Mingus and Hartman that do end up keeping the Bethlehem name alive, where people like me can discover them. But Bethlehem's entire arc of albums is just really a great documentation of a great time in the music. And I'm a huge fan of her work. I'm a huge fan of her spirituality. Just a real fabulous emoter. So possibly my favorite Sinatra record. And that's a tough thing to define. So yeah, it's hard to really pick a favorite Sinatra record. I love so much of his Capitol output that it's fabulous, it's boisterous, it's full throttle Frank. And his reprise stuff has a wide swath of influences, from almost country to, hints of rock at times, hints of R&B at times, jazz elements. But this came out in probably 63, maybe 62. And at the height of the Bossa Nova craze, when everybody was doing Bossa Nova. It's just so great to hear Frank in this kind of constrained, restrained tonality. He's just, he's singing How Insensitive here, which is one of my favorite Bossa Nova songs. And he does The Girl from Ipanema, He does change partners, Dindy, Quiet Nights of Quiet Stars, Corcovado, Meditation. I mean, I Concentrate on You. It's a really great collection of, I mean, what's pretty much standards of the Bossa Nova era. And Antonio Carlos Jobim accompanies him. And it's very minimal, which Bossa Nova is. And Frank was a great enough singer that he recognized that it required him to be minimal, him to be diminished. And he's not boisterously clanging over these huge charts. He's gently nudging his voice over these soft arrangements. And like I said, it's one of my favorite Frank records, and I play it a lot at the club. It's just a vibe. It's a mood. And it's glorious. It's just a feel that it's sunny. It's sand between your toes. It's what Bossa Nova should be. So this is Joe DeRise, another Bethlehem record that I love a lot. Kind of an East Coast lounge cat with a bit of Mel Torme. I mean, he's not Tony Bennett. He's definitely not Sinatra. He's not this huge, bright presence. He's a much more velvety act. And sounds like an Italian American. Again, great. Bethlehem, Gus Wilde, Creed Taylor. Interesting band here. Nick Stabulus on the drums. Jack Brokenshaw on the vibes. A lot of it's the Australian jazz quintet, Dick Headley, Errol Buttle, Jack Brokenshaw, Bryce Rhodey, and Jimmy Gannon, assisted by Nick Stabulus. An Australian jazz quartet has probably 4 or 5 records on Bethlehem at this time. DeRise has another LP, I think it might have been a 10-inch, on Bethlehem, where he sings piano and plays. And it's a great record. This has him in a bit of a bigger setting. But again, a real... Again, this is a vocalist in a jazz setting. And it's great stuff to play on the patio, I mean, on a Sunday gig. I'm a huge fan of his work. And he doesn't show up much in the jazz canon after these Bethlehem recordings. But from what I've read, he performed in the East Coast scene for a long time. And I really enjoy his work, and if you have a chance to find these old Bethlehems, definitely want to grab them. So I had someone come in the other day and asked me about a Tal Faro session with another guitar player, and it turned out it was Sal Salvador. And it took me a minute to figure out what he was talking about. And so much of Tal Faro's body of work is that clef, Norgran Verve, that I couldn't place what session he was talking about at first. Like, who's this other guitar player? And I was like, and I know that there was a couple compilations that happened at Verve with a few other guitar players, like Oscar Moore and I think Herb Ellis maybe, and I'm trying to remember who the other guy was, but nothing was ringing a bell. And I had forgotten that he had done this 10-inch Tal Faro at Blue Note. Number 5042, probably puts it in 1954, maybe 53. And this is a Japanese version of this. And Tal's a fabulous player who I'm a big fan of. A very nimble guy with Don Amon and Clyde Lombardi and Joe Morello. So not a very standard Blue Note assemblage there. But again, that's pretty common in the 10-inch era. So much of the Blue Note sessions didn't have a traditional Blue Note lineup or traditional Blue Note vibe. 10-inch era was very much a disparate collection of recordings and artists. Some of it was licensed from Europe. I don't know if this was actually recorded by Blue Note. Cover by Bill Hughes, Frank Wolf, Leonard Feather. Leonard Feather writes the liner. I'd have to read it. I'm not sure again. Like some of the 10-inch era Blue Note, wasn't recorded by the Blue Note guys. Cool cover. And his dexterous, nimble playing is already well on display here. But it was Sal Salvador that he was talking about, who was also on Bethlehem quite a lot. And these were actually coupled together, these two Blue Note 10 inches, in Japan as an LP, and that was a reference to the album he was talking to. And I don't have that coupling, so when he was trying to describe this record, I couldn't place it. I'm like, what's he talking about? And so it took me a little bit of time to kind of discern what he was getting at. And I'd probably seen that these had been coupled together before on an LP, like a cover with them like kind of laid out like that. And this is, of course, an actual Blue Note 10-inch original with Frank Sokolow, John Williams, Jimmy Campbell, and Kenny O'Brien. And again, that's a bit of a Bethlehem lineup there. And I'm a huge fan of Sal Salvador, and he does end up at like a bigger label by 60 and records a lot of kind of TV show tunes and kind of saccharine, almost easy listening stuff. And a guy has bills to pay, but anything from Sal Salvador in the 50s is great small combo jazz stuff that by a very nimble player, a very dexterous guy who had a lot to share and say. And so it was kind of fun trying to figure out what session this guy was talking about. And these are both fairly rare recordings by two somewhat overlooked players in today's jazz landscape. Big fan of both guys. And the last record we're going to talk about today is Red Garland, who of course was Miles Davis' piano player from 53 to 58 or so. Part of that great first quintet. Red ended up getting quite a heroin problem, and he was dismissed rather uncelebratory from Miles' quintet, replaced with Wynton Kelly. And Red had become somewhat unreliable, but Red was a fantastic player. And a lot of Red Garland's work is at Prestige, where he was recording with Miles. And during the height of the Miles Quintet, he starts getting a lot of trio sessions on his own that are really fabulous records. I love those records. And he also gets a couple of quintet sessions with guys like Donald Byrd playing instead of Miles Davis. And those are interesting contrasts to the quintet stuff with Miles, to hear him playing with a more flamboyant trumpet player than Miles. And Miles was really coming into his own at this point in terms of who he was going to be as a player. And so it's interesting hearing the minimalism of Miles with Red, and then hearing a guy like Donald Byrd with Red. Red's a great player who's well versed in all the ideas of swing and the blues and the black church, who has elements of the hard bop. Obviously that Miles Quintet was one of the first real great hard bop assemblages, imitating the Messengers and the fantastic Clifford Brown Max Roach quintet. But Red ends up doing some recordings in the 60s for Jazzland, which is Riverside, their affiliate label. And this is a quartet setting with Les Spann, Sam Jones, and Frank Gant. And again, that's a hardcore Riverside lineup right there. So again, the label you end up signing with will often dictate your sidemen a lot in this era, in these sessions. But it's interesting hearing him in this setting. Spann's a great guitar player who has a couple of records at Riverside. And Sam Jones is on a lot of the Riverside body of work as a bass player, and a great bass player he was. I'm a huge fan of Red Garland's work. Again, it's fast tempos, nimble playing. It's joyful, it's celebratory. Somehow it's also construed with the blues. It's construed with this weight that we're trying to nimbly extricate ourselves from. And Red was a troubled guy who is one of my favorite players in jazz, to be honest. I love Red's body of work. Red and Bluesville, those kind of records on All Day Long. His work at Prestige is really, really some of my favorite jazz. It's wonderful. I mean, his piano trio setting stuff is always some of my favorite. Mood, vibe, coffee shop, rainy day. I love going to Red Garland's body of work. And they're the kind of records you can play 3 or 4 times each side and just have no problems continually digesting the same few songs, because it's just a mood, it's a vibe. And once you're in it, you want to stay there. And Garland's body of work is the kind of stuff that I think a lot of jazz people want to find, but we're often so misled down all these difficult pathways, and we kind of ignore and hear these guys be diminished by some of the experts. Like, I mean, all Garland stuff is, I mean, it's fantastic. It's fantastic, and you can feel this guy pouring his soul into his instrument and expressing a deep love for his music and his art form. Some of the best stuff in the jazz canon. I'm a huge fan of his work. I have a customer coming in, so I'm going to wrap this episode right there. Y'all enjoy this. Check out these records. They're all fabulous. Y'all have a great day.